This topic was commissioned by Anonymous, who helped me pay for my monster gaming computer. Alright, go! I appreciate that Cuphead understands the basics of conveyance. Conveyance, as Google defines, the action or process of transporting someone or something from one place to another. In this case, conveyance refers to the transferal of information from the game to the player. Cuphead, for the most part, understands how to communicate information to players so that players understand how to achieve victory. This transferal of information takes place in the moment, with attack wind-ups, the pink coloring of parryable pieces, and whatever. And conveyance takes place within the design of the characters, animations, and graphical user interface. Cuphead and Mugman are exceedingly simple designs, consisting of a minimal, human-like body and a cup for a head. They don't have many colors, consisting of black, white, and red or blue. Their animations are quick and simple. Many actions these characters take do not have animations and simply cut between two different states as players enter inputs, creating a lack of delay. All of these aspects accomplish two things. They make Cuphead and Mugman feel responsive as player avatars, and they make these characters not the center of attention. In other words, they do not attract the eye, they do not distract. The player characters are undistracting so that players don't focus on themselves and instead keep their position in the peripheral vision while they look at the bosses, which are the center of attention. The bosses of Cuphead contain a plethora of animations to capture the eye, color, detail, and size. Bosses dominate whatever frame they reside in. It is important that player attention is directed at the opposition so that players more easily focus on the obstacles coming at them instead of becoming enraptured in their own image. And that is what I will declare to be good conveyance, because focusing on your enemy is the thing you should do. If you look at people like fighting game guides, like Smash Brothers, you gotta look at your opponent so that you can see what they're doing and respond to it adequately. If you want this concept explained better, watch Extra Credits' video on Punch-Out Wii. It's very good. Cuphead seems to have a disproportionate ratio of load times to content. Because of the processor-intensive art style, but bite-sized play structure, Cuphead bottlenecks chunks of 1 to 2 minutes of gameplay behind a black screen accompanied by a dancing hourglass as the software loads the overworld in each new level. On powerful PCs, the load times are short enough to not be a problem, but on the Xbox One, loading can take anywhere from 7 to 19 seconds, and that much time spent on a black screen has a tangible effect on the experience, especially when playing co-op and trying to keep the "haha, we're having a good time hanging out and playing games together" vibe going. Alright, I don't remember what the load times were when I played it on Xbox One, and I'm looking up on YouTube and it looks like the average load time on Xbox One is 9 seconds, with the exception of Diamond Long Plays. I don't know if something's up with your friend's console, but dude, 20-second load times, dude. It's freaking crazy, man. 9 seconds is still too long, by the way. I want to make a universal hit on loading screens here. Loading screens are moments when play stops completely, along with it the momentum accumulated, and a non-diegetic display idles by while an underpowered machine struggles to acclimate memory space for the sheer amount of assets which are about to enter the scene. Compare that to a film in which the sequence of events take place, and no matter what happens, and no matter how much effort it took to get those images on screen, a viewer knows that everything that is being shown to them has artistic intention down to the millisecond. Timing is a very important aspect of audio or visual art. Timing sets mood. Timing can make a rowdy scene faster, and slower timing gives viewers a moment to catch their breath and drink in the image. Pausing or lingering on a frame informs the viewer to think about the current image and reflect on its plot relevance and thematic significance. Many video games, however, after minutes of substantial content, in which the timing and position of many different objects matters significantly, the scene ends, and a tiny icon on the corner of the screen dances slightly. There is little artistic relevance to most loading screens, as loading screens are inherently something which humans would prefer kept as short as possible. When loading screens are too long, people complain, and when they are reduced, titles are praised. Load times longer than, I'll say, 5 seconds is pretty bad, I'll say. Let's take a look at some examples. Breath of the Wild loads a massive amount of content when entering the overworld from an inside area, which understandably takes a lot of effort for a machine to generate and place, but imagine, if you will, humor me, how much more a player would want to explore if this screen didn't exist. These models, textures, sound effects, etc. must have large file sizes, judging by the image of the piece. But must the files be so beefy to evoke the desired response? A game like Team Fortress 2 must load a map onto a server and then distribute that map and game data to every individual player participating. It's somewhat understandable for a game to take a moment to load the map when the game accommodates for 16 active players at once. However, I'm embarrassed too, and try not to think about what percentage of my total TF2 time is spent tabbing out to Twitter. Out of 50 hours in the past 3 months. Oops. Cuphead, however, is not a game with a massive scale. Its levels match in length that of Dustforce, whose levels can take up to 2 minutes. Dustforce's loading reflects this by being instantaneous. A state of flow is uninterrupted by level transitions of any kind, and the game has a reputation for being non-stop. The lack of waiting complements the experience and helps create something greater than the sum of its parts. Cuphead is a game with the incredibly detailed and painstakingly animated sprites and environments which would justify a hearty load, but the content doesn't last long, and the player jumps between overworld and brewing brawls often. Therefore, the loading times don't complement Cuphead's interactive aspect very well, and it makes for poor timing. The solution would be to either find a way to optimize the game to shorten load times, or change the loading screen to make it more artistically valuable, and therefore satisfying to the experience. And that's my loading screens rant. Hashtag ban all loading screens. Look guys, I understand that loading is something inherent to a video game, but we've seen games that load good. We've seen games that do a really good job of loading in a way that doesn't interrupt the play. In fact, the first video game, not the first ones, damn it. Oh man, they didn't have to load a sheet of no Joe, did they? They just put that shit out there. It feels like the game's pushing itself farther than it should, and we are kind of paying for that. We're clearly willing to wait for games to load to a certain extent, and what I'm proposing here is to push that extent backwards to get that few more seconds of your life back. Those few seconds which accumulate into minutes, which accumulate into hours, which accumulate into days over the course of your life. I like that Cuphead's tutorial is optional. Gotta praise a game for making its tutorial skippable. Sweet Jesus, people, please make your tutorials optional. Because it's very easy for tutorials to be boring and unchallenging and an obligation to complete before the piece can truly begin. Again, it feels like an interruption, so I'm glad that Cuphead does not interrupt you by doing that. You can walk straight out of the house, or you could blaze straight through the tutorial, because the tutorial never takes control away from the player to show you how to do the thing. And that's also a good. I would also like to praise Cuphead's clever, uninterruptive, unintrusive tutorial on how to equip items. A control is taken away from the player momentarily, and a message pops up that says, hey, press Y to open the menu. And then the moment the player presses Y to open the menu, they gain control of their character again. That's it. I don't need the suitcase man walking around the menu. I don't need a detailed explanation of how to operate a menu. I can do that. I'm an adult. Yes! And going into the menu is something you want to do anyway, directly after you receive an item or a super. And it only happens the first time in a file, so it's like, alright, thanks dog, thanks. I like that Cuphead's first boss, the slime, is dead simple and dead easy, but it can still hurt those who don't respect its movements. To a player who isn't paying enough attention, its jumps are random, its arcs tricky to position oneself against, so it's not the freest kill in the game. This is something that I hope to communicate with this video, that Cuphead is a game which works for the respect of its audience. The lengthy and taxing artistic process of game creation, employing the techniques and stylings to the extent that it does, demands respect, as a given. But interactively, Cuphead demands respect from players. Cuphead's bosses, particularly on expert mode, require the acknowledgement and acceptance and mastery over potentially annoying or otherwise challenging behavior to succeed in. You can't particularly beat a boss with your brain turned off, you can't quite muscle through it. Secondary obstacles which don't contribute to the boss's hit points must be managed, or players will end up trapped and defeated. Multiple enemies attack at the same time with different patterns, requiring multitasking and tight perception to stay on top of. Patterns get faster, enemies get wider movesets, and the number of projectiles increase. The player must respect the game to beat it. I appreciate that Cuphead never allows mindless play, is what I'm trying to say. The first phase of the flower boss on Expert entails him using only one attack, the one where he shoots seeds out everywhere. This behavior is easy to program, but it changes the fight completely. It's harder than the last two phases even. Flowers and seeds litter the half of the screen Cuphead is allowed to move in, forcing the player to bob and weave between the front and back of the arena. Hiding in the corner until they go away doesn't work here. Parrying the pink seed is especially helpful in mitigating the plant apocalypse. This is a meaningful challenge because it elicits player response and requires real thinking and effort to overcome. But it's spam. The boss is performing the same exact animation repeatedly at a predictable rhythm. Can you respect that? You have to respect it mechanically to be able to beat it, but can you respect it artistically? I like the entirety of Inkwell Isle 1 because it houses a great variety of enemies and levels, and because it's the beginning of the game, the difficulty causes no hiccups in the experience. Inkwell Isle is always a smooth, breezy experience from beginning to end, which feels swell. The variety of bosses include a slime, 3 different vegetable monsters, a double trouble frog shuffle, an anthropomorphic plain woman who transforms into a moon, a bird, bug, and tree, and a dancing flower who is cool and has a fun dance and a great song and is a good experience. Most of these bosses fall into the forest setting, if only vaguely, but feel different in form and function, which keeps the player's attention well. Why do we like variety again? We like variety because it is the spice of life, because the repetition and sameness is often boring, and people don't like being boring. So yeah, Inkwell Isle contains strong aesthetic and mechanical variety while maintaining aesthetic cohesion. I understand that the argument I just made was, this contains variety. This is the definition of variety, therefore this is variety, and that feels weirdly like a fallacy. I don't know. Like, hey, frogs are different than moons. I don't know. Do you know? Do you know? I appreciate the shortcut under the cliff, which allows players to complete the second run-and-gun stage and the ghost house before completing a single boss, because on return playthroughs, players are going to be more used to their late-game loadout than the default equipment set, so players can gather up to 13-ish coins and the first super move before they pursue a single contract. And because of the way the shop works, the player can choose between most items in the game at the beginning. I can't quite buy the charge gun and the smoke bomb at once, but I'll be able to get them fairly quickly, and I'll be able to choose between one or the other at the very beginning. I like that ghost houses give players a safe environment to practice their parry combos. Parrying dangerous obstacles is something a player will only want to do if they feel safe enough to do so, and Cuphead gets the player in the least safe feeling scenarios by nature, so the feeling these ghosts evoke by not causing collision damage is refreshing, as in reinvigorating. Parrying certain obstacles in Cuphead can feel fairly tricky because of the way they approach the player. Pink frog punches approaching at unpredictable heights all too low to the ground to quickly respond to, the rabbit's balloons approaching from below or above, actually any obstacle in the game which approaches from above, because how are you supposed to parry an object when Mugman must spring upward toward it and it's falling toward you, and that's just a recipe for positioning disaster. Anyway, I like parrying, and I think that it's a mechanic which was implemented in an overall satisfactory manner, particularly due to the sound effect which plays while it happens, that fine smack, followed by one of two fanfares depending on whether the player's super meter is full. Anyway, ghost houses are good, and I like them. Whoops, just kidding, I have a criticism, apparently. In the first Cuphead major update, a voice clip was added to the Ghost House introduction. It is certainly a good thing when developers go back to their released product and apply some spit shine and polish and squash some nasty bugs. However, this addition feels like a band-aid because of the difference in voice between the spooky voice and the regular one. The fact that the same voice says "and begin" between normal levels and Ghost House levels elicits a feeling inside me of, oh, they didn't have a new voice clip to say "and begin," but they had a new voice clip to say "the ghoulies are out tonight." I'm jarred by the tonal juxtaposition between the spooky voice and the "and begin" voice. Plus, the fact that this was added later, the fact that this was changed, makes the piece feel somewhat less intentional, because the developers felt the need to go back and fix this thing, switch this value here, and change this. It suggests that the artist didn't fulfill their vision completely the first time. But if I really cared about that argument, then I'd complain when Dustforce released Dustforce DX, a free expansion to the game, which did all the things and made the game better. Yeah. It's like, okay. It really only matters if the game feels complete the first time, and Cuphead felt complete the first time it was released. Night in the Woods felt complete the first time it was released, and then they released an update that added a bunch of stuff and changed a few things. Dustforce felt complete upon release, and that's the point I'm trying to make. So basically, it's fine. It's good. However, I look forward to the moment when they stop trying to update the game and just leave it as it is, because that will indicate the final version of the product, and how it will stand for years to come. How it is. I would like to praise Cuphead on its graphical user interface design. The darn thing's almost non-existent, which is exactly what Cuphead needed aesthetically. This game is pursuing the aesthetic of 60 to 90-year-old cartoons, which, due to their medium, did not, in fact, have graphical user interfaces. Therefore, having as little interface as possible makes this piece feel more authentic. Additionally, the small size of the display incentivizes players as little as possible to look at it in the heat of battle, which means the interface will never distract the player from either appreciating the scene on the level of how much consarned drawing and animating effort it took to create, or the level of, oh, I need to watch and respond to this boss's patterns so that I don't get hit and lose. I don't know if it's an inspired or creative touch that they did this, but the health meter of the boss only displaying after failure and not during the fight creates all sorts of emotional through lines and prevents yet another distraction from clouding the heat of battle. There is a tension in the air when the player is on their last hit point, begging for that startlingly quick knockout animation. This aspect of the game complements other aspects of the game and is therefore a good. Gold star GUI. The GUI accomplishes all that it sets out to artistically, but is also very clear and conveying in its information. The hit point font is bold and is contained in an undetailed, plain little box, and the super cards are not usable until they flip from a dark, saturated color to a dominantly white rectangle. These visual aspects allow the graphical user interface to inform the player as much as possible, as clearly as possible, and that's good too. Good, Cuphead. Cuphead is good, guys. Just wanted to be clear about that. Here is a criticism of the cup and the head. I think that the punny lines a boss gives when the player is defeated are not entertaining. I think they're poorly written, I guess, because whenever I die in the game, I purposely glaze my eyes over to spare myself the wound salt and mash retry as quickly as possible. Here, let me show you some death lines, and you can tell me in the comments if you laughed or even grinned at some of these lines. Between Inkwell Isle 1 and 2 is a cutscene whose narrative impact is questionable at best. Holy shit, can I just copy-paste my notes on this, please? I have no evidence of this from any developer commentary or something, but I think that the story of Cuphead serves to facilitate the gameplay and nothing more. The idea of fighting one's friends who have transformed into monsters isn't expanded upon to create drama. No psychological horror or conflict of interest exists. Cuphead has strong audio-visual, mechanical, and challenge aesthetics, but its narrative does not provide much to chew on. The choice that players are given to give the soul contracts to the devil and the previous cutscene of Papa Kettle telling Cuphead and Mugman to do the right thing when the time comes fails to evoke an emotional response, as the choice is informed by gameplay and nothing else. If I give the soul contracts to the devil, I get to the end credits without fighting the final boss, and when the game reboots, the main menu music is playing a creepy reverse remix. It's an alternate ending. If I choose not to give the soul contracts, then I get to fight the final boss and trigger the real ending along with the credits. It's not a choice then, it's a decision. The reason players play Cuphead is for the challenge and sensations of the sensational animation, which is provided by fighting bosses. One decision allows the players to fight a boss, and the other shows it is the correct decision to not give the soul contracts to the devil, not for any moral reason, but so that the player experiences the final boss and is then stimulated with more animations, more challenge, and the conceptual side. This is a bad video and I'm not going to put in the effort to make it better than it currently is. Satisfaction of fighting and defeating the devil. Because this moment is a decision with a correct answer and not a choice, then the cutscene which foreshadows the choice also fails to accomplish its narrative goal. I don't care about the plight of Cuphead saving his friends because it wasn't elaborated upon in any thematic detail. I am invested in the survival of Cuphead as I am playing him and dodging a myriad of projectiles. Oh no, I got hit once! And this isn't that big a problem because you just mash A through the thing, it's 5 seconds, but it's just, wasted effort, It's also relevant to mention the King Dice song, which is a fully featured lyrical piece, which only plays in areas which take 5 seconds to walk through and can only be appreciated if players stop playing the game or go on youtube.com to listen to. It's inefficient from the standpoint of content creation to create content which won't get noticed unless the player stops playing the game, which they are incentivized mechanically to play, but that extravagant touch definitely sets a tone for Cuphead as something which is trying to be greater than the sum of its parts, and not less. As game reviewer as that fucking sounds, right? Okay, back up though. This moment actually demonstrates a really subtle but amazing trend in Cuphead in which 0 songs in the game explicitly loop, like the .mp3 file ending and restarting, because every song is at least numbers minutes long, but no boss lasts longer than that without transitions. That's pretty rad, man. Good job. I don't like Inkwell Isle's 2 aesthetic nearly as much as 1's. This is personal preference more than artistic failure, though. Section 2 is carnival-themed. Bosses include a candy princess, a genie, a two-faced clown man, a giant bird, and a dragon. This argument isn't feeling very scientific in my head, but this section features the most shit-eating angry smiles, and I don't like looking at clowny carnies with shit-eating angry smiles. The Genie is an impressive boss fight with no less than 5 phases with incredible mechanical and aesthetic variety, and its spinning, seemingly clay background looks stunning, but I hate his stupid fucking face, so I hate this boss. The clown, too, has a lot of toys to mess around with, and a train which moves on its own to mess with the player. And the clown even looks fine when his mouth droops open playfully, like he's some sick monster who revels in slaying children. But boy, does this just look completely undesirable. Is that the intention? That might be the intention. I hope you guys aren't offended by me saying I hate their stupid shit-eating grins, because it's kinda meant to be funny, you know? It's not meant to be like an indictment on the game. It's meant to be a personal thing, like, I don't like his fucking face, man. Like, you can like his stupid shit-eating grin, obviously, man. Game's not shit for the artistic decision they clearly intentionally chose to make, right? I hope you guys are realizing that my criticisms are complete bullshit, because that's the vibe I'm getting. Something about the Candy Queen never sat right with me, even though she's an easy boss which summons 3 of 5 sub-bosses who all behave differently before chasing the player with her monster house castle. Something about the aesthetic doesn't quite click with me. Do I just not like pink? Maybe I don't like pink. I don't like how she throws her head and the head just kinda chases you forever. The head doesn't kill me, I beat this boss easily every time, often on the first try, but the head completely distracts the player from looking at the boss herself. Oh, that's it! That's what the problem is. This boss which takes up a third of the screen, whose castle grew arms and crawls after the player in a quite entertaining manner, and this crazy woman who shoots her candy shotgun at the player. Absolutely none of it registers in my vision because I'm too busy focusing on this stupid decapitated head floating around. Visually, it takes away from the piece. It is a distraction which detracts from the pleasure of this particular scene. I did it. I solved the mystery of why this boss I don't like it. The gravity swap mechanic is a smart and clever inclusion, especially for a wacky, mind-boggling funhouse. However, the act of switching gravity is unsatisfying due to the bounce caused by the parry, which makes the player linger in the air for a substantial amount of time. Once, on the first playthrough, I managed to hit the parry, switching gravity, and bounce into an obstacle on the gravity plane I was waiting to be pulled away from. Additionally, the splaying of gravity swap cards throughout the level prevents effective parrying, because if a parryable enemy floats even remotely near a gravity card, the player will parry the card when they intend to parry the pink thing and take accidental damage, and then when the player has 3 maximum HP, taking accidental damage is a massive problem which makes the level significantly less desirable. This is a nitpick, but once I defeated the 2-mouthed wall enemy, just as it was preparing to shoot a projectile, so its I'm shooting a projectile animation was interrupted by its death animation, the projectile still shot, and fuck you, buddy, get out of town with that shit. The bosses in Isle 3 are all pretty sick, with the most variety of them all, in fact, and I feel like I'm making a superficial point when I keep using the same word over and over again. But the bee office is neat, the pirate ship is good, the play is great, the rat is alright, I hate the robot for personal reasons, the Medusa mermaid is an absolute classic, and the Phantom Express is one of the top 3 bosses in the game. Any questions? The points I'd like to make are as follows. Captain Brinybeard is strangely the least visually interesting thing in his fight. It's weird to think about, but this human in the top right is the boss, the character, the thing to beat up and defeat and to take the soul contract of. But what the player is looking at throughout the fight is anything but him. The chest, the pink thing and its shots, the ship and its shots, the shark, and the inky thing. The treasure chest is the real boss. If something isn't an explicit obstacle to the player, or if it isn't visually interesting in the video game known as Cuphead, my eyes simply will not see it. It will not register in my brain as something which exists in this space. It's very weird. It's not like it's in my peripheral, it's as if it wasn't even there. This happens with certain projectiles, this happens with some background objects maybe, but the biggest example is Captain Brinybeard. I just straight up don't see him, and that's like weird, man. What's up with that? What is up with that, my dudes? The first phase of the robot boss deserves praise. The robot consists of 3 separate pieces with their own behavior which must be destroyed individually before it reveals its weakness, as if you're breaking it down piece by piece. This allows players to choose between which piece they want to defeat first and to dance between all 3 meticulously until the whole thing breaks down. You know, it's a machine, you see. Plus, when each piece breaks down, new attacks take its place, creating an incredibly dynamic experience. It's good stuff and demonstrates Cuphead's meaningful difficulty while staying thematically relevant. The difficulty of Cuphead isn't always because things move fast and are hard to react to, or because of cheap hits which come out of nowhere, or whatever. Sometimes the game moves fast, but here Cuphead is difficult because the player must pay attention and react to multiple tells at once and manage their positioning to weave through a special hell. The first phase of the robot boss is a work of art. It is multiple pieces working with each other, complementing each other to create a cohesive whole. It's competent, and it's aesthetically pleasing, and it's satisfying to play through. I've been talking for a year, so let's keep going and not at all wrap this up even remotely soon. I like how the stage play girl turns into the background. The painterly style in her third phase, that's nice. Okay, the ghost train fight is the best fight in the game. A new mechanic is introduced in which the player stands on a cart which can move to one of 3 spots on the stage, but both the player and enemies can move the cart, and sometimes it's desirable to keep the cart in a certain place, and sometimes the cart must be shifted to constantly avoid damage. Every phase of this fight is a different ghostly enemy, and the song is downright fantastic and complements the train theme well. I especially praise this fight for hard countering my charge move and forcing me to switch weapons out. The ghost's eyeballs can't quite be managed with such a semi-automatic weapon. This fight is the only fight in the game which basically forces me to switch weapons, and I think that that's a good thing because a character earlier in the game says, "Not every weapon is effective on every boss." And if the game's going to have a mechanic of multiple gun options, it's good that one option isn't overall the correct one to use in every situation. Again, this ghost fight is basically 4 mini-fights in one, each with a different enemy which evolves and utilizes the train car mechanic in a different way, and that's downright fantastic. The only criticism I can justify is the fact that bosses will still damage the player upon death. It's understandable for a boss to damage the player on contact, even when it's tucking its tail between its legs, because that same boss isn't actually dead and they're going to return in a few seconds to continue fighting. But these ghouls, when defeated, are in fact defeated and go away forever, to be replaced by a new ghoul. Therefore, it doesn't make sense that these ghosts damage the player after they die, so when the player jumps into a dying skeleton to pop the mischievous pumpkin with the pink brick and takes damage, that damage feels unearned. And that's, again, 1/3 of the player's maximum health, so that's a big deal. Alright, well, King Dice is actually the best fight in the game, so I can imagine the Cuphead developers brainstorming and going, alright, we're going to have a boss rush at the end of the game because those are cool and they make the player feel empowered by beating up many bosses consecutively and more easily than they have been up to this point. Instead of reusing old bosses to get the point of empowerment across, they concoct 9 unique bosses and a minigame surrounding them, all encompassed by the casino theme. And it's thematically relevant to have 9 sub-bosses under King Dice because, as a high-ranking dude, he commands people to do his bidding. He looks so clean and is dressed dapper, so he comes off as the kind of guy who doesn't want to get his hands dirty. This boss rush really goes to show how much sheer effort the Cuphead devs put into this game. They stuffed it with more unique content where they could have recycled old stuff or perhaps recolored something. However, there's a big snag right at the end of the longest fight in the game. Although this fight was designed to be more forgiving because it is the longest, indicated by the opportunity for players to regain health, and by having the sub-bosses be easier than Inkwell Isle 3's, and by only giving King Dice himself a single attack to prevent endgame chokage, something about King Dice's attack is very sinful. You see, for this attack, King Dice moves his hand forward, to Cuphead's plane of existence, to shoot projectiles at him. His head moves forward too. King Dice's head grows and increases in detail, even gaining a green eye circle where there was none. You see what this suggests as a game mechanic? This suggests that King Dice's head just became a hitbox, or a hurtbox, whatever, I'm going to call it a hitbox. You touch it and it damages you. It looks like King Dice's big head is on the plane of Cuphead, and that Cuphead would take damage by touching it, when in reality, his head is not a hitbox, and the player must overlap with it to keep up with the parade of cards and to parry the pink ones. I hope I'm not the only one who experienced this problem, because if I was, then I'm looking really arrogant here by saying that that's bad conveyance, dude. Whoops, mega bad conveyance. Had to look that one up on YouTube the first time around. It's only a real problem the first time around, but dang, son, major dropped ball there. Really tragic to have such a hiccup right at the end of a 4 to 6 minute boss fight, huh? So I hope I wasn't the only one who that happened to, so I don't look like a complete idiot there. But hey, if you haven't played Cuphead yet and you're listening to this video, you're probably completely lost, but hey, just know, Cuphead, King Dice, his head is not a hitbox, and you can just do. Well, the devil's the best boss in the game anyway. I find it a fantastic decision to round out the game on such a straightforward, succinct fight. The devil has a myriad of attacks, from fast to slow, from punchy to lasting, and it's an absolute blast. And then, whoa, his head turns into the background. That's so sick, dude. The spectacle is out of this world. That bomb doesn't really look authentic to the 1930s aesthetic, but whatever, man. The music is pumping and the energy is through the roof to defeat the devil in a one-on-one fight. The second and third phases utilize the mechanics of management and sub-enemies to good. That's the thing that we also did in the game. We did the one-on-one fasty boys and we did the multiple boys. It's too bad that the last phase chokes the player unfairly and all but forces them to grind for RNG to give them a favorable scenario, huh? That's not true in the slightest. What should I say instead? The last phase of the devil was clearly meant to choke the player, but I feel like it does its job a little too well, I guess. The final phase of the devil results in a single small platform to stand on, with parryable tiers falling on the sides and an occasional poker chip nuking the only piece of safety. Players must jump around the chip to avoid damage, but also avoid the tiers, and you see the problem here. The tiers are falling down, and the player's jumping right into the tiers to avoid the chip. There's no room to parry the tiers, and the tiers are so dull that they're basically invisible anyway, because I'm looking so hard at the devil and the poker chip, they have just so much detail and animation to them, so I'm forced to redo the fight until I can either get to this phase with more than 1 HP, or until I get a final phase where the chip and tiers don't fall at the same time. Or I could just learn the third phase without supering invincibility through it. Whoops! That's on me, buddy. That's on the player. You gotta respect Cuphead artistically, you see. That's the thing that I said earlier in the video. This game is challenging, in fact. It's not gonna give it to you for free. It's clear that the last phase is meant to choke players indicated by its length on the progressometer, but I feel that they went too far with the choking, blah 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 blah. Had to look it up on YouTube. What a shame for the last fight in the game to be that way, blah 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 blah. I could be better slightly. There's a certain extent that I could just try to play better instead of saying that the game sucks for what it does. And that applies here, I think. But I'm also going to make the point that Cuphead gives you 3 health points. Everything in the game damages you for 1 damage, including falling off of bottomless pits. And because of that, the player isn't quite psychologically put into a mindset for experimentation, because experimentation results in damage. And if you're not trying to avoid damage, you're going to die fast. Anyway, everything is so bouncy in this game, and there's so much peril that it feels like there's not enough downtime to stop and smell the 4 or more years of effort it took for these dudes to animate this stuff. Jeez. Every character bounces, dances, floats, jitters, and shifts to the point where their position in space becomes less than completely clear. It's unrelaxing. And any satisfying sense of space is stifled. What the fuck is a sense of space? A sense of space is the feeling of being in a place and of knowing your position relative to the world and how to navigate yourself through the world. In Cuphead, that would translate to zigzagging through obstacles and projectiles like a ninja or something. But avoiding damage more often is done by the dominant strategy of using your super and turning your brain off. Cuphead is not a game of hiding in the corner. What the fuck is my essay even saying? The camera in Cuphead shifts, zooms, sometimes, not very often. Doesn't do it very often, but when it does do it, it's not real. What am I trying to say? What am I trying to say? Trying to say Cuphead's gay. Cuphead isn't interested in giving me a sense of self-expression, and I'm entitled to self-expression. I don't know. I don't fucking know. Like, any complaint I make at this game is like, yeah, but also fucking it doesn't matter because it's good. Cuphead's existence is an unquestionable benefit to culture. I played it, I enjoyed it, I soaked it in. I might not play it again though, I don't care that much about it. It's not Steeb core, but no game needs to be Steeb core. That's a fucking retarded term, dude. It's simply good.